Welcome back to this series entitled The Lord's Gospel. This is part 12, and we're going to continue on examining the covenant to Abraham. In the last part, we talked about the idea that God did give commands to Abraham. We didn't go through all the commands he gave, but we did take notice that commands were given to Abraham. The first one, of course, the initial command was just to go forth from your country and your relatives and your father's house. So it was basically, I want you to leave your tribe. I want you to leave your shelter. The provisions that are normally given or afforded by the world for your security and safety. I want you to leave that, and I want you to go to this land where I'm going to show you. Okay. Now, I'm going to share the screen real quick on this, because notice that if you wanted to make an argument, okay, so here's a command, and then he says, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, so you shall be a blessing. Okay. These are all promises, right? And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Okay, so these are a lot of promises right here. And if you wanted to say, well, what if he had not gone from his country? What if he had not left his shelter? Would those promises still hold true? You can make an argument that, when you do this, when you go forth from your shelter, then I will make this, I will make you a great nation and all that kind of stuff. You could make that argument if you wanted to. It's not explicit, but I don't think that's the way you would look at it. But I just on its face, you could make that argument. But here's the problem. You have a lot more commands after this one. We talked about it last time, walk before me and be blameless, as an example. And that's in Genesis 17, 1, verse 1. So you have that command. That's a pretty major command. You have the commands of circumcision. You have the commands of, sacrificing your son. So there are other commands that are given to him. And they're never couched in the idea that if you do this, then I will bless you. He's already made the promises that he's going to bless him. He's already made them in Genesis 12. The rest of the commands that were given to him, you can't go retroactive and say, by the way, those promises I gave you, they're conditioned upon you doing these commands too. So you have to think about how do I think about this? What are these promises made to Abraham? These commands that were given. And did it really matter if he obeyed these commands or he didn't obey those commands? Would the promises still be valid? People talk about they're unconditional. These promises are unconditional. They say that a lot. These promises to Abraham are unconditional. It makes you think as though it didn't matter if he obeyed or didn't obey, okay? That these are unconditional promises, and we looked at in the last part how he would establish this covenant, he would do it, and it can give someone the impression that there really isn't anything that you need to do or need to worry about, okay? And you can just claim the promises as applying to yourself, and they're unconditional. And you can say, I'm a descendant of Abraham, so this promise is made to me also. And so, boom. Okay, I claim it. I claim those promises for me, and they're unconditional. So we're done. That's kind of the mindset of a lot of the church system teaching. obedience is kind of like a bonus, Pleasing God, you get rewards in heaven if you please God. If you obey and you please him, and the more you please him, the more rewards you get in heaven. That's, and maybe I'm, summarizing too much or not representing the teaching exactly correct. But I have to say that most people in the church system would see it that way, where obedience, that, the promise of eternal life and all that, and forgiveness of sin, it's unconditional. All you have to do is accept it. It's a gift. Just take it. And you're good. Okay. That's the idea you get from the church system teaching. Okay. And you should be grateful for your gift, and you should show your gratitude by serving him and giving back, going to church, tithing, evangelize, do some projects, things like that. So that's the idea that you take away when you're sitting, under the tutelage of the church system and the teaching of the church system. And it's a very dangerous approach, because any other approach they would call, oh, don't be legalistic. We're not under the law. And they'll make those statements. Okay. But they'll say, you don't want to be legalistic on the one hand, you don't want to be worldly on the other hand. So there's this tension that you're always like walking this fine line. You don't want to be worldly. Okay. You don't want to backslide. Okay. But you don't want to be legalistic either. And so you have this thing where you're kind of going back and forth, and what does it look like? What does it mean? Everyone's confused, and everyone just kind of goes, well, as long as everyone says I'm a good person, then that should do it. And that's where you kind of end up, practically speaking. Practically speaking, you pretty much end up in a place where, as long as others recognize me as a good Christian, okay, or at least a Christian, in a struggling Christian, or or just a misguided. But as long as they continue to call me a Christian, and I can associate in that manner, that I'm good. It's that kind of and that some will just say, will give up on all of it and just say, I just declare myself a Christian. I'm a Christian, and I don't care what you say. Only God knows, and I'm a Christian because I believe in Jesus. So there's all kinds of different, places where people fall, and kind of like where they kind of land on this idea of how do you assess yourself? How do you look at yourself? How do you kind of determine or do any type of self analysis as to your spiritual state. And most people will say, well, I'm going to heaven because I don't hate God, and I love God, and because I'm always pro God, pro Jesus. We've talked about this before, but that is, when you're sitting in the, in this, under the teaching, the tutelage of the church system, you're going to fall somewhere in one of those categories that I talked about. Most of the time, you're going to fall in one of those categories, more or less, and maybe a combination of a couple or three, whatever. But that I'm going to tell you, that's really not how the Bible describes a child of God. Okay. It's not in any of those categories. how the Bible describes a child of God is someone, and let's go to another verse, because we're talking about this covenant with Abraham, and in this passage here, he's talking to Isaac, and he's telling Isaac, go ahead and sojourn in this land. I will be with you and bless you. Okay. For to you and to your descendants, I will give all these lands. Okay. Again, Isaac knew it wasn't going to be in his lifetime, because he already told Abraham, and I looked at it, was Genesis 15, where he tells Abraham, and we can go to it real quick if you want. Genesis 15, where he says in verse 13, know for certain your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you will go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. Then in the fourth generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. So that's all in chapter 15 of Genesis. So God tells this to Abraham. God says to Abram, he's still Abram at the time. So he tells him this, that I'm going to give you this land to you and your descendants, but it's not going to be in your lifetime. You're going to be buried. Well, how am I going to get this land? How's that going to work? Well, it's obviously going to require the fact that you're going to be resurrected from the dead. There's going to be a resurrection. And we talked about, last time we talked about how could the Sadducees read this and not come to the conclusion that resurrection is obviously exists. It's a thing. It's going to happen. And it's going to happen to Abraham. It's going to happen to Isaac. It's going to happen to Jacob. Because none of those, none of those men of God were going to, that promise, even though it was made to each one of them, they were never going to receive the land in their lifetimes. So how do you deny the resurrection in light of this? You see, this is the point, how people just, their scripture, it's pretty open and shut about how this is going to work, and yet they are stubborn in their denial for resurrection, and it's not for reasons that they're looking for the truth; it's for other reasons, And I'm not going to try to speculate at this point why they would want to deny the resurrection, but clearly they have other reasons that are self-serving in doing that. But let's go back to Genesis 26. So anyway, he's talking to, in this passage here, he's talking to Isaac, and he's telling him, look, I'm going to give you these lands. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to establish this oath, which I swore to your father Abraham. Okay. I'm still doing that. It's still in that mode. Now, it doesn't mean he didn't begin to already establish the oath. Okay. It doesn't mean I think he began by giving Abraham a new heart, by quickening his spirit, making him a child of God, and giving him regenerating his heart. Okay, in Abraham's lifetime, who knows when, but that's when he began establishing the oath. That has to happen, and let's talk about why. But there's more that needs to be established. That part has to happen, and that has to happen to each of his descendants, each of his spiritual descendants, right? I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. And again, I'm going to, point out where God says, I will establish the oath. Okay, I will establish the oath. All right. But then let's go a little further. I will multiply your descendants as stars of the heaven, give your descendants all these lands. Okay. Again, we're talking about spiritual descendants now. Clearly, because this is an everlasting covenant. Remember, we looked at that in the last part, for an everlasting possession. So you can't say that this designated people of God under the old covenant were given the land as an everlasting possession. That did not happen for them, these physical descendants of Abraham. So he must be talking about the spiritual descendants of Abraham, because that will happen, but it hasn't happened yet. Okay, so I'll give you your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth. And this can be. Let me see if I can. Yeah, this is the better translation here is, and in your offspring or in your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. And I think Paul is pretty much saying, look, that really is referring to Jesus Christ. In your seed, all the nations, all the peoples of the earth shall be blessed. Okay, so that's a better translation than the way it's worded here, as though it's going to take all the descendants. All the nations of the earth will be blessed. That's not how Paul interprets it. He interprets it as one. We looked at that before. I think we did in Hebrews 11, or what it may be another place in Hebrews where he talks about that. Yeah, maybe it is. But anyway, that's how Paul would interpret this language. But let's get to verse 5. And then he says, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Now that's a pretty heavy statement right there. Notice first of all, you have this conjunction because, as though if he hadn't done it, these promises wouldn't carry forward. This covenant would not carry forward. It almost gives you that impression, doesn't it? It almost gives you the impression that these promises were actually, after all, conditional. That Abraham had to obey him, keep his charge, keep his commandments, his statutes, and his laws. It all comes under the overarching command to obey God. Okay, and we're going to go through these things a little bit and kind of define them a little bit. But excuse me. But anyway, but you see the point. This little conjunction, because, and that's in all the translations, by the way. It translates the same because. It's a causation. It's like, I'm going to do all this for you, Isaac. Okay, I'm going to carry this covenant forward. I'm going to establish this oath, which I swore to your father Abraham. Okay, and that will require multiplying your descendants, stars of heaven, all that stuff. But I'm going to establish this with this oath, which I swore to your father Abraham, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, kept my commandments, my statutes, my laws. Well, that's interesting. So how do you get around? I mean, how do you think about this? What makes sense that will make all of these statements very consistent? The statements in Genesis 12, the commands that were given to Abraham, and then this statement here, that this was a requirement, that this had to happen. This was part of God establishing his oath. This was part of it, that Abraham needed to obey God. Abraham needed to keep his charge. He needed to obey his commandments, my statutes, my laws. This word because is kind of a big deal. It's basically telling you, well, what if Abraham didn't obey all those things? Well, then these promises would be null and void. It's what it sounds like, doesn't it? But that's not how God presented the promises in Genesis 12. As though the most you could say was that he left his tribe and went to get this, and followed God to the land. That would be the best you could do as far as interpreting any condition on the blessings that were given in Genesis 12. Do you understand what I'm saying? But I'm telling you that even that isn't like a condition. You can't think of it that way. However, you can't ignore the fact that Abraham obeyed God and left his shelter and did follow God to look for the land. So how do you think about it? How do you understand this? Okay. And let me just throw something out. Let me just propose something while we're here and thinking about this very topic. The commands given to Abraham were not a condition. They were not put forth as a condition that needed to be fulfilled for the promises to be fulfilled. That's not how these commands were presented. Okay. They were presented as instructions to Abraham, for sure. But the promises were never conditioned upon obedience to those promises, to those commands. Okay. But yet Abraham did obey them. Okay. So how do you think about it? See, the best way I can think about it, and the way I see it, it's not as though the promises are conditioned, but I think the better way to say it is the promises are confirmed by the obedience of the one to whom the promises are given, the promisee, if you will. But these promises are confirmed by the obedience of the promisee. Okay, so they're not conditioned upon obedience, but they are confirmed by obedience. Do you see? There's a difference. And the difference being that when the promises are given to a child of God, those promises are always confirmed by obedience. When the promises are given to the general public, just to anyone, men of flesh or men of God, a mix. So they will typically be conditioned. The promises will be conditioned upon obedience, because these promises cannot be given unconditionally to those that disobey, to those who are inclined to disobey. Then no. These promises aren't meant for you. They're not meant for you. They're only meant for those who will be obedient to the commands given them. Okay? I mean, I that's what I'm saying. So when it's an unconditional promises, they're only intended for authentic children of God. That's it. Only them. Only the remnant. Only the chosen. Only the elect. That's when the promises are given unconditionally. And why is that? And I think I said this in the last part, because authentic children of God will obey. Okay? That's part of God establishing his covenant with spiritual descendants of Abraham. They will obey, and God will make it so. God will ensure their obedience. Okay. And does it mean that they're sinless? No. Does it mean that these children of God will always be in, under the wing of their father. No. They could be outside, for a time. And the classic example is David with Bathsheba being outside the relationship, or there was a division between the child and the father. Okay. And while this sin had yet to be confessed, and there was no repentance given. So during that time, I think it was about a year. Since David did his thing with Bathsheba, and then when he finally confessed it and got right with God, when Nathan came and called him out. So, so there can be a time where the child will be separated from the father because of sin. But there's a guarantee that separation will be cured and they will be joined again. Okay? Authentic children of God will always come back. And you may look at the example of the prodigal son. They will always come back. They will always come back. And a lot of it is, and we know this in David, the agony that David went through during that time of separation. He talks about it, in Psalm 51 and other places. He'll talk about that agony of separation and how his soul was just withering away, because it's agonizing being separated from your father when you're an authentic child of God. It's not fun. It's miserable. It's like you've lost your refuge. It's the thing that you always counted on, and now, you feel distant. You don't feel that connection, and you're miserable. You're not happy. Okay, and yet you can remain stubborn in that situation, in that state, for a while, as David did, for a year. It was eating him up inside, but yet the thought of repenting and coming forward and confessing was just so, I guess, such a difficult, a difficult stumbling block, or such a difficult barrier to get over for him by himself, that he couldn't break through. He couldn't go ahead and on his own just give the confession. He kept this pretending as though nothing was wrong. Okay. And he had to keep up that facade. But when Nathan came, because God sends Nathan, says, okay, you can't seem to confess it. It's eating you up inside, and yet you still can't confess it. Well, I'm going to push you over. I'm going to push you over the edge, because you are my child and you're not getting away from me. So I'm going to send Nathan and just throw it out in your face so that the jig is up now. Now it's just, you don't have to make the confession. I'm going to have someone make the confession for you, in essence. I'm going to reveal your sin to everyone, okay, through Nathan. So this is what God does, because this is what God does to his children. He doesn't just let them go. He gets them back, okay? And so Nathan comes, and David is just relieved. Finally. He needed that push. He needed somebody to call him out. He needed someone to say, you're that man. Okay. He needed that, because now he can, oh gosh, finally it's out, and I don't have to sit there and cover it up anymore. I don't have to hide it. I can weep. I can repent. I can confess. I can go into mourning. I can do all these things, get myself right, clean out my heart. And see, it's a big relief for him and brought him all kinds of joy, you see. So it's amazing how even an authentic child can get caught up in sin and be separated and feel that angst and that misery and that withering and that death and just feel awful. But yet the thought of having to come forward is just so, it's so scary and daunting that it just seems too much. It's too overwhelming. It's like, I can't do it. I can't take that step. But then God will take it for you. If you're his, yeah, he'll take it for you. And then that relief comes. And then all of that stuff just gets purged and you get yourself right again. And yes, there may be consequences like there were with David. There'll be consequences. But he was right with God again. And that is something that, you know, he I don't think he ever let go of again. That was just so agonizing. He's never going to put himself in that position again. This is what an authentic child looks like. And that's why obedience, even though it's not, you know, the promises aren't conditioned, the promises to a child of God is not conditioned upon obedience. It is always confirmed by obedience. See, that's the difference. And that's the kind of thinking that will when you approach these passages in that way, everything falls into place and everything can be understood and harmonized. And that's why all of this conditional promises in the old covenant, okay, and we'll look at that, but that's why they were made in that way. And the promises made in the new covenant and in Deuteronomy 30 in the restoration of Israel is not made in a conditional context. You see, that's why, because it all has to do with whether you are a child of God or you are a child of flesh. Okay. That it's really that's the distinction that you have to keep in mind. And then when you do that, who's he talking to? You have to think, okay, who's he talking to? You know, and then you have to think, okay, so why is he saying it this way? Why is he saying it that way? So, anyway, so let's go through this. So it is this idea that obedience is required, but it's expected. And in fact, it's predestined. Obedience will happen because God will establish it. God will make it happen. Okay? He'll always find a way to get his kids back to him. That's just the way it is. So how do you know if somebody is real? Just like he says, how do you know if someone is a wolf in sheep's clothing? You know them by their fruits. They're fruits of obedience, fruits of righteousness. Because you know that a child of God will always end up in a state of obedience. That's how you know. That's why Jesus says that in Matthew 7. How do I know? This guy looks like a sheep. He talks like a sheep. You know, he seems to appear to be a sheep in every way. And how do I know there's a wolf under those clothes? Well, you look at whether he's truly obeying the commands of Christ and he's truly in obedience with the commands of God. And you have to know what those are. And you have to be very familiar with them. And you have to, study them. Like in Deuteronomy 11 talks about that, about putting them on your wrist and on your forehead and talking about them when you rise up, when you lay down, and when you're inside the house, when you're outside on the road. You're always dwelling on the commands because that's part of how you understand what is God's preferences? How do you please him? What is his standards? What does he like? What does he enjoy? If you love him, you're going to want to know those things, right? If you're his child, you want to know what the Father expects out of you because you want to please him. That's just the way it is if you are an authentic child of God. If you're not, if you're just a poser, it's not going to be a big deal to you. You're not going to really care all that much. You're going to kind of make up your own standard. We've talked about this before. You make up your own code, your own law that's kind of customized for your lifestyle, and you follow that. Okay, and there's lots of people that do that. Almost everyone does that. They have their own customized law, their own customized code that they follow, and then if they break that, no problem. You just modify your code to account for that. I mean, it's I've changed my mind. I realized that maybe this isn't so bad, or maybe it depends on the circumstances, and so you kind of make things up as you go, and in a way that justifies your life, and that's how people live their lives when they are not authentic children of God. Okay, so in any event, let's go through some of this. So the first thing he talks about is he kept my charge. Now, what does it mean to keep my charge? It just means that you're kind of like responsible. You're kind of there are certain things that you need to. You're a steward. You're a steward of certain things or certain people. You're the man of flesh is like Cain. Am I my brother's keeper? Okay. Well, the answer is yeah. When he's your little brother, you should have a certain duty, obligation to be a role model to your little brother and to make sure he's okay. And the answer is, if you were really sensitive to God's laws, is that, yeah, you are a keeper of Abel. Okay. But the man of flesh is going to say, they're going to reject any type of obligation or responsibility to have some sort of to fill this role of being as someone that is taking care of another, or taking care of as a message, or like Paul would say, I'm a steward of this gospel, of this message. I am responsible for delivering this message properly, accurately, and I need to spread it to those that I've been sent. Okay, so that was Paul's attitude. He was a stewardship of that. So you're going to be a steward. A husband is going to be a steward, as an example of his wife, of his household, and his kids. Okay. That's like a minimum. There's a stewardship there. He has to, he's given that role, given that responsibility, and he's got to, he's got to fulfill that. That's just something that's given to him, and you can't, say, oh, I'm not going to take that. I'm not going to do that. Why should I? It's not my responsibility. So you have to understand what exactly your responsibilities are. You have to take stewardship of those things that God gives you. But at the same time, those that are not given to you, you don't take those on in addition. You see? So just make sure that you're on the same page with God as far as how your stewardship should be exercised. But for Abraham, as an example, when Lot came with Abraham, there was a certain level of stewardship Abraham had for Lot, Lot being his nephew. And I mean, there's levels of stewardship, right? There's levels where, his stewardship was first and foremost, obviously to God, as far as obeying any commands that were given to him. We'll get to that. But next to that was his family, his wife and his family and his household. Okay. And then there was Lot, was also a level of stewardship, a lower priority, but there was still a little bit there. And that's why, when Abraham came, when there was when there was a time when Abraham and Lot just couldn't, there was too much friction going on, because Abraham had a bunch of sheep and whatever livestock, and so did Lot, and they just couldn't seem to live together anymore. So he had to separate. So what did Abram do? He said, "Look, here's the whole land before you, Lot. We need to separate because we're getting in too many fights, and this is just going to get worse. And I don't want that. I don't think that's good for either one of us. So why don't we go ahead and separate, and you can choose whatever land you want. You can go west, or just pick whatever land you want, and I'll go the opposite direction." And so that's when Lot chose that land in the valley and Sodom and Gomorrah and all that kind of stuff, and because it was all nice looking and everything. And now Lot was a righteous man. Lot was a brother for Abraham. So there was a certain connection there. And so Lot had to act as a steward in that way. And so he gave Lot first choice, deferred to him because of his, I think, a feeling of stewardship towards him. When Lot was taken by those kings, you remember, Abraham went after him to retrieve him, right? And to rescue him. Okay. He felt that stewardship. There was a certain, I'm responsible for him. He went with me. He's a brother of mine, a spiritual brother. I'm sure Abraham felt that. So Abraham went after him. He was his brother's keeper. Okay. He went after him, rescued him. And then I don't know, I imagine he probably said, "Lot, why don't you come with me? Because your possessions have been taken." I don't know if Lot got back all his possessions, per se, but Abraham gave everything back to the king, and maybe the king divided up, the king of Sodom and Gomorrah divided up, to those that originally owned this stuff. I don't know. But, maybe he said, "Look, you look like you've downsized now, Lot. Why don't you come with me?" I mean, he obviously must have downsized, because, later on you see him, he's in the city. So where's his livestock? Where's his stuff? Where's his sheep? I mean, how come he's not outside the city with his, with all his stuff? I don't know. I'm just kind of, thinking out loud, but in essence, so Abraham probably said, "Hey, come on. But Lot, I'm sure his wife didn't want that. I'm sure Lot's wife just, I've done that, been there, done that. I don't want to do that anymore. It's boring. I like the action here, a lot more." So Abraham went back to where he was, and Lot stayed in that area and wound up in the city, as we know. And then when the three angels came, one of them being angel of the Lord, and they start talking to Abraham, and the angel of the Lord says, "Look, I'm going to tell you, Abraham, I'm going to tell you, we're going down to Sodom. We're going to destroy it, and I just want to let you know." And then they did a little bargain. He started to bargain with them. Why? Because he knew that Lot was living there, and he felt, again, a stewardship. He felt like he wanted to be a keeper of his nephew. And so he bargained all the way down to 10, righteous people. You know that story. And so And then the two angels went down. He bargained with the angel of the Lord, and then the two other angels went down there, and Lot showed his hospitality and brought him into his home, and there's more to it, but the point I'm trying to make is there were things that were put in as far as Lot was concerned, and how Abraham responded to these situations in obedience, with that heart that he wasn't afraid to be his brother's keeper, and he wasn't afraid to sacrifice for his nephew, his spiritual brother, and to have his back. Okay, unlike Cain, as an example. So that's the difference between a child of God and a child of the flesh, right? So, that's with Lot. Now, how else did he fulfill his? Let me go to Genesis 18. How else did he fulfill his? This idea of having a charge, in verse. In chapter 18 of Genesis, in verse 19. Okay. What am I? Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. So this is a part of what the angel of the Lord was saying, when they were, the three we're going to go to Sodom and all this kind of stuff. They had these conversations, and it says, the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation? Okay. Notice again, surely become a great and mighty nation. Before Abraham demonstrated full obedience. This is before Abraham demonstrated full obedience. This is before Isaac was born. Look at how God is talking. He will surely become a great and mighty nation. Like, this is unconditional. This is going to happen. Why is he so confident? Because God's going to establish it. Will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So, for I have chosen him. Again, the language that's used is always, I will establish the covenant. I have chosen him. You see this language that is all about this election type of principle. I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. You see how this obedience is expected. It's not presented as a condition. It's presented as an expectation. Like, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. Okay. So these promises are never are alone without obedience. These promises are always fulfilled and when they are accompanied by obedience. Obedience is always there. You see my point? It's always there. It's expected. Why is it expected? Because that's what sheep do. Sheep hear the voice of the shepherd and follow. So obedience is expected. You're never going to have promises fulfilled to someone that's disobedient. That's never going to happen. And that's why you can tell an authentic sheep from a sheep from a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's how you can tell. Because the true sheep is going to be obedient. Has to. They really have no choice. It's going to happen. Okay. For I have chosen him. He may command his children and his household. These are the people, he's given charge of his children, his household after him, to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. So it's a command. He's going to command his children to do this. And I'm not sure about this. I didn't look this up. It just struck me right now. But the way this command is, it almost appears like it's not just a verbal command. It's a command by example. To keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. Well, okay. Maybe that's just describing what the way of the Lord is. After him, to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. In other words, if you do righteousness and justice, you'll be keeping the way of the Lord. That makes sense. Yeah. Maybe that's how it should be interpreted. So this is what he's going to do. He's going to command his children to do these things, to keep the way of the Lord, and specifically to do righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. So isn't that an interesting choice of language? You see, he's chosen him to be obedient, to fulfill his charge to his children and his household. Okay, to keep the way of the Lord, to demonstrate, not only to give him verbal instruction about what is righteousness and justice, but to demonstrate to his children and his household what is righteousness and justice because of his own obedience. Okay, so he's chosen him to do this, and then it says, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken upon him. Now it looks conditional again, doesn't it? I mean, you see how that can fool you? It can confuse you if you're not thinking about it right. But you can understand this. You can understand how this can harmonize. If you understand, it isn't condition. It's not conditional, but obedience the promises will always be confirmed by obedience. And so it's like, because the obedience is there, and by the way, God says, and by the way, I'm going to make it so that it's there. But because that obedience is there, I can go ahead and fulfill my promises, because I can't fulfill my promises to someone that's disobedient. You see, this is what's clear. He can't fulfill promises to someone that is disobedient. So Abraham has to be obedient, and God's going to make sure that he is. That's really what's happening right here. That's what makes sense. That's what this. If you approach these passages with that framework, with that understanding, then everything becomes clear as to why he says things the way he says it. Okay. So anyway, another example of the idea that a child of God is going to be obedient. The promises require it. The obedience must be there. But no worries for a child of God, because God will make sure it happens. Will make it so. That's why the seed in good soil grows up and grows to bear fruit. The seed in good soil never gets choked out. It never wimps out, right? It always bears good fruit. So if you're good soil, you will bear good fruit. It's going to happen, okay? And it has to happen, okay? And that's because the promises are really given to those people. So you can never pretend as though obedience doesn't matter. It does. It has to be there. It's critical. Okay. And this is going back to Abraham. So if you're a descendant of Abraham, you're in the same boat as Abraham. You have those same spiritual promises and requirements and context as Abraham. Okay. In other words, you'll be obedient, just as Abraham was obedient. Bottom line. So anyway, this is another. Notice how he is put in charge, his children, his households are given to Abraham as his charge, and he has to nurture them. He has to shepherd them the best he can. Okay, the best he can. Make these commands. Now, if they resist and rebel and and do all that kind of stuff, then what does that mean? They're not a spiritual descendant of Abraham. So if he had kids that would rebel, and then he may have had, Ishmael, who, may not have been a spiritual descendant of Abraham. So, and he had, by the way, Abraham had other sons and daughters after the death of Sarah. He took on a wife and had other sons and daughters. Were they spiritual descendants of Abraham? Who knows? But very well may not be. Abraham, I'm sure, gave the same commands. He took charge of his household. He took charge of his new wife. He took charge of his new kids. Okay, this is like, how old was Abraham when he's having kids? He must have been about, I think, 125 at that point, or 115, one of those. I mean, he was still getting up there, still having kids, and he would take charge of them, and he would command them, and he would nurture them, and try to form them in a way, in a manner that they would respect and fear God and keep the way of the Lord, and do righteousness and do justice, right? That's how he would train them. Does it mean that every child of Abraham would follow that training and would follow those spiritual guidelines? Only if they were a spiritual descendant of Abraham would they do that. If they weren't, they would not. That's just the way it works. And the same go with Isaac and Jacob. Isaac, having Esau and Jacob. Esau was not. God hated Esau. Okay, was not a spiritual descendant of Isaac or Abraham. Jacob was, even though he acted like a little conniver, right? A little trickster. Okay, so there you have it. So there's another example. Boy, time's going fast. In Genesis 17, let me back up a little bit. That was chapter 18 right there. Genesis 18:19. This is 17. We've been here before. We've talked about a lot of this language already, but I wanted to go down to 23, where it says, well, I guess I should start. Where should I be? Where should I start? Where's the command? Oh, okay, here it is. So in verse 9, he says further, Abraham, as for you, you shall keep my covenant. You shall, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant. Now, here he's being put in charge of this covenant, of this command, of this special command of God for him and his descendants. And these would be physical descendants. Okay. The command is, this is my covenant which you shall keep between me and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. Okay. So it's every male. So it's not just the spiritual descendants. It's every male. Because this is a sign of the covenant, but this is a sign that is on the outside of the flesh, which really has nothing to say about the heart. Okay. But I don't want to get into that right now. But every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin. It shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. Okay. And that is that would be reflective of this spiritual circumcision also. This circumcision of the flesh being reflective of the circumcision of the heart. And the covenant between between God and Abraham is a spiritual covenant. Okay, it's a spiritual covenant. Okay, so in that sense, this circumcision of the flesh in the foreskin is a sign of the covenant between me and you, but it doesn't necessarily apply to all those who are circumcised in the flesh. Do you understand? It's not just this circumcision is a sign of this covenant, but the covenant between God and Abraham was a spiritual one. Okay, this sign is an outward sign, and not everyone that exhibits this outward sign is part of this covenant between God and Abraham, because they may not be spiritually circumcised. Okay, that's the difference. Maybe I didn't explain that very well, but he's giving an outward sign, and this outward sign has to be made on all males. The outward sign is on all males, but the sign is for this spiritual covenant between Abraham and God, which this covenant does not cover everyone that shows the outward sign of that covenant. Do you understand what I'm saying? You have this, everyone included in the outward sign of the covenant is like this big circle, right? This big circle, all the males, everyone, men of flesh, men of spirit, they're all covered by this outward sign. But those that are really of the covenant of Abraham and God is the spiritual covenant. That's a smaller circle. Okay, that's a remnant. That's a smaller circle. That's actually a part of this covenant with Abraham and God, because it's a spiritual covenant. So anyway, but the sign of this spiritual covenant is going to be exhibited on a lot of men that are also men of flesh. It'll be exhibited on men of flesh also. Okay, so the sign and with the covenant, okay, this covenant, the sign of the covenant covers a lot more people than the covenant itself. Is that a better way to put it? The sign of this Abrahamic covenant will cover a lot more people than the covenant itself, the spiritual covenant of Abraham, which only covers a remnant of those people that have that outward sign. All right, that's best I can do. Anyway, all right. So anyway, so you circumcise in the flesh, it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you, and every male among you who's 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations. A servant who is born in the house or was bought with the money from any foreigner is not your descendant. And it goes on about how many people are going to be given this sign. A lot of people are going to be given the sign, but not everyone given the sign of the covenant are part of the covenant, are covered by this covenant. That's the point. And that point is made over and over, by the way, in later talking about, what Paul would always talk about, the circumcision, those that are circumcised under the law may not be circumcised in the heart, and part of this covenant with Abraham may not be a true descendant of Abraham, okay, just because you're circumcised in the flesh. So anyway, I hope I didn't confuse things even worse, but that's the point. So the sign is going to cover a lot of people are going to exhibit the sign. Okay. So, but an uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people of flesh, these descendants, physical descendants, his physical people. So if you're not circumcised in the flesh, you're going to be cut off from your physical people. He has broken my covenant. Okay, he's broken my covenant. So you have this this sign if you want to call it a covenant sign, where this sign of the covenant with Abraham is a covenant in and of itself. It's like this covenant is you need to be circumcised in the flesh. That is a covenant, a sign covenant, and then you have the Abrahamic covenant. But if you're uncircumcised, then you've broken this sign covenant and you're cut off from the physical people. And that's reflective, or that's, if you translate that to the new covenant, it would be, if you're not circumcised in the heart, then you're cut off from the new covenant people. Okay? That's how you would translate it. It gets a little confusing, and I'd have to draw pictures to really, I think, illustrate it a little better. But, for right now, I guess that's the best I could do. I'd have to get like a whiteboard or something. That's what I would need. But anyway, okay, so that took a lot of time. But my point is this. Abraham was given this command, and he had, as a steward of this command, and he had to not only obey it himself, just for his own self, but for everyone whom he is. This command is to be imposed upon all those that God has told him to impose it on. Everyone that's been put in Abraham's charge has to have this done to them. Okay, so that's why it says, then Abraham took Ishmael. Even Ishmael was included as part of this sign of the Abrahamic covenant, the sign covenant. This covenant that this promise that he was circumcised in the flesh, every male. Okay, that's a covenant in and of itself. That covenant in and of itself will be a sign of this Abrahamic covenant, which is a very more selective covenant just for spiritual descendants. But anyway, then Abraham took Ishmael his son. I mean, this is why, by the way, Paul would say circumcision isn't necessary under the new covenant. It's not, the circumcision of the flesh isn't necessary under the new covenant. You see, because that sign has under the new covenant is not required under the new covenant. It's not, we don't have a physical people anymore. They're all spiritual people. So you don't, and the sign of the spiritual people are fruits of righteousness. That's the sign that they are true children of God, true members of the new covenant. Okay, that's the sign of the new covenant. So just the obedience. So this fleshly sign has no business. That cannot serve as a sign under the new covenant. That's meaningless on the new covenant, because that's just an outward, sign of the flesh. That's not something that comes from the heart, like obedience does. In any event, I probably settled too much, but then Abraham took Ishmael, his son, and the servants who were born in the house, and all who were bought with his money, every male. And so, in other words, he does this. He performs it. He obeys. He's obedient. Okay, this is something that was put in his charge, and he did it. He followed through, and he circumcises everyone that God tells him to circumcise in the flesh. He does it. Okay. So, last thing that I guess, oops, no, I didn't mean that one. This one here. And this is another example. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. So again, he follows through and does what he's told to do, as far as this command has been put in his charge to impose on those who have been put in his charge. And so he makes sure that command is carried out. Okay. So those are examples of things that were put in the charge of Abraham. This was given to Abraham, and he was a steward over these things, and he obeyed God's command. He fulfilled his duties as steward of all of these things. Lot, his household, and commands that were given. Okay. All of these things, by the way, if you're connecting dots, all of these things you should be connecting. You should be connecting. What does it mean? Lot, spiritual brother. What does it mean? His household and, things like that. What's the connection? What's the translation in the New Covenant? The household of God, the ekklesia of God, your gathering. Okay. In addition to the physical, you still have that with wife and your physical household and that kind of stuff. That's true. But it also translates in the New Covenant as your spiritual household, as God's household, where you're put in charge of that, or you're made a part of it. You're a participant. And this idea of faithfully carrying out this statute of circumcision. There are statutes, that will apply only to this new covenant age. But we'll get to that. But you could be making translations all the way through here. Now, he says, now let's go back to 26. I want to go back because he says, obey me, kept my charge. Okay, that was all about keeping his charge. Now, my commandments. What are commandments? What are these commandments? We've already talked about it a little bit. But commandments are those that are given to one person specifically. Okay, this is how I kind of distinguish it. It's like God gave Abraham the command to leave his home, leave your home. Okay, and he gave that command when it was time. When the time was right, he gave that Abraham. He said, leave your shelter, leave your tribe. Okay, now it's time to go and go to this land I'm going to show you. Okay, that was a command given to Abraham at the time, at the right time. All right. And Abraham obeyed. Okay. So it's kind of a personal command, although that command probably will be given to each and every citizen of the new covenant, of this new kingdom, will at some point will be given. Okay. But it was given to Abraham at a certain time when he was 75, and that's when he took off. And that's one thing. He was also given given this command to him personally, was to sacrifice his son Isaac. That was the command given to Abraham. And in Genesis 22, it goes to that whole story. You know the story about how he was going to sacrifice his son. We talked about that before. But that was a command given specifically to Abraham, a personal command. And he kept these things. And he says, then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven. This is after the angel of the Lord stopped him. Said, okay, don't do it. Don't stretch your hand against the lad. Don't do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God. You have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Okay. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing, okay, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, indeed I will greatly bless you. Okay, we're right back to where we were in, I think it was Genesis 17. It's the same language. Because you did this, I'm going to greatly, wait a minute, God, didn't you already promise to greatly bless me? Why do you say it like that? Because you have done this. You see, hopefully now you can say, oh, well, I get it. It's this promise was made unconditionally, but it's always confirmed by obedience. And now it's almost like, now that it's been confirmed as it had to be, and as it was going to be, because I was going to make sure it would be. But now that it's been confirmed, it's another way of establishing that covenant. It's part of the establishment of the covenant, is making sure there is obedience with his children. So when he makes these unconditional promises to his children, he establishes this covenant by guaranteeing the obedience to the commands given them. You see, that's not all he has to do. That's part of what he's doing in establishing the covenant. Okay. That's part of what he's doing. Now we know that the other part is to make sure that there's the slip-ups, the times when there's been separation, like in David's case, the times where there's been sin, where the child is not walking before God and being blameless. There will be certainly many times when that will not hold up, when there will be a violation of that command that God gave to Abraham, or the command Jesus gave, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, he gives in Matthew 5, right? There's going to be certainly times, and maybe even periods, where you will be in disobedience, you will be outside, you will be in violation of that command. Okay. You'll be in violation of that command for a time, but you'll always be brought back. But the point is, how are you going to deal with those situations? So part of the establishing of this covenant, making sure that this covenant, that he can bless him, and we're going to talk about the promises a little bit, but the covenant that he will bless, and to ensure that part of it, that's going to be a provision that God makes. Again, God establishing it, because God is going to be the one giving the lamb, the sacrifice that's needed. It's the lamb of God, God's lamb. God has to give the lamb. God has to give the sacrifice to take care of those issues. You see? But there will be obedience. There will definitely be obedience, because you will need to have obedience in your life, so that when, you'll have these fruits that Jesus is talking about, these fruits of obedience, because if you don't bear fruit, you're cast in the fire. He says that in John 15, right? You have to have fruits. So those fruits of obedience must be there, and God will make sure they are. Okay? And those times of disobedience are taken care of by the sacrifice that God gave, this lamb that God gave to the cosmos. Okay? Or to his people. Okay? When I say cosmos, I understand there'd be a lot of, like, what does that mean? God gave to his people, to those that are covered by this covenant. To those that are covered by this covenant to Abraham and his descendants, his spiritual descendants, that those people under that covenant are covered by, okay. So that's how God establishes this covenant, right? That's how it works. So, so that's why this language should not be surprising. It should not be surprising that Abraham was obedient to the command of God to sacrifice his son. And he says, because you've confirmed, you provided this confirmation of my promise. I've promised you these things. It was confirmed by your obedience. Now I can go forward and continue to bless you. And this promise is not thwarted. This promise has not been sabotaged. This promise has not been, broken. I mean, it hasn't been made invalid. It hasn't been made invalid because you've been obedient. Because you've been made obedient. And by the way, I'm the one that causes you to be obedient, right? I mean, I can't have it any other way. So that's all part of it. That's all part of it. You got to, and that's why when I talk about election, I talk about these things. You don't have to go to Romans 9. You could just go to Genesis. It's right here. And it's right here in the beginning. Okay. All of that is right here. So you don't need to go anywhere else to get your head around this idea. But, so this was a commandment given to Abraham, specifically, personal. And there will be commands given personal commands given to those to his kids, to his children, right? Very, very easily that could happen. Okay. So that's just something we can talk about that more at another time. But he also, let's go back to 26, and I'm running out of time, but I want to at least cover this part. He kept his charge, his commandments. What are his statutes? What is that? These are statutes. These are commands, laws, or commands. Statutes are those things that apply to a certain age. They apply to a certain age. Now, the statute that applied to Abraham going forward in that age before the old covenant, but post Abraham, before the old covenant, was circumcision. That was the thing that needed to be obeyed. Okay. It's a statute that applies to a certain age. Okay. And that was carried forward into the old covenant age. Okay. But the post-Abrahamic age and all the way to the end of the old covenant, that whole age, circumcision would apply to that age. And that had to be followed and obeyed. So statutes are certain things that will apply to a certain age. Okay. So statutes under the new covenant age that applies to everybody in the new covenant age would be, one would be seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness. That's like the primary statute that only applies to the new covenant age. Okay. There really isn't the same type of, command in any other time, any other period. Okay. So, and that's because this new kingdom was brought. All of the elements were put in place to establish this new covenant kingdom that was an image of the glorified kingdom. We talked about a lot about that before, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, so that's what a statute is. And the only statute I can say I think would apply would be circumcision. That would be the statute. You can say that, I don't know. I mean, the idea that you're supposed to teach teach your children, teach your household to follow the ways of the Lord, to be righteous and justice. That idea of teaching and commanding your household to do that. I don't know if you can make an argument or not that particular age, because it certainly goes to all the ages. I don't know. That might be more of a law, or no, that probably more of a charge. Yeah, a stewardship. That would follow under the charge thing. Yeah, like I did before. Yeah. So statute, I can't think of. I think the only statute that God was talking about would be the circumcision. I think that was it. I may have missed one, but I think circumcision is certainly the key one. Now, he also says he kept my laws. Now, what are the laws of God? Now, the laws of God are the two big commandments that are applicable everywhere. That is to obey God. That is to love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Those are laws of God. Maybe to walk with God, you're commanded to walk with God, be blameless. That would certainly be a law of God? Okay. Is it duplicative, or is there some overlap with the other, the two greatest commandments? Maybe. I'm sure there might be some overlap, but if there isn't, if there's anything that might be a little bit more in the walk with God, where you're living in his presence and you're being blameless, that would certainly apply. Okay. Now, whether or not keeping charge, like we just talked about, keeping charge of your household to command, to teach people to be obedient, and that's probably law of God that was established in creation during that time. That's probably another one, and there may be others. There may be others that might go back to that Genesis period. The roles of man and woman would be another law of God that is applicable in all the ages. It's whatever a law of God is, something that's applicable in all ages. It's from beginning to the very end. Okay, until the glorified state. Okay, that not or millennial state, I guess would be a more accurate. But that's what the law of God is. Okay. So, and then some laws of God would even apply through the millennial state, and who knows? I mean, maybe even to the glorified state, I don't know. But in general, I hope you understand what I'm saying. I think that you can distinguish between God's charge, God's commandments, God's statutes, and God's laws in that way. That's what I think. That's my take on it. Okay. Now we're out of time, so it took a lot more time than I thought. So we're gonna end it here. We're gonna end part 12 right here, and in the next part we're gonna start finally talking about the promises and what they mean, and how to interpret those promises, at least to a certain extent. I don't know if I'm going to get into great detail, but at least to a certain detail. And this is all part of understanding what this covenant of Abraham is, because we're descendants of Abraham, and so we're subject to this covenant. Okay, so we have to be aware of how it works and where it's going. So I hope it's been helpful to at least be able to harmonize this language, understand this difference between a command that's a promise that's conditional and a promise that's confirmed. Some promises are conditional upon obedience, and some promises are confirmed by obedience. They're unconditional promises confirmed by obedience, but obedience is always there, always has to be there. Okay, that's always going to be true. Okay, so all right. So where am I? Nope. There I am. Okay. So anyway, all right. So that's it for part 12, and I hope it's been helpful. Any questions? Go ahead and write them down. Ask me. And I know it's been a little confusing to some of it, but until next time, thank you for watching.